This is going to be actually a session divided into two parts. It's the presentation in detail of three country case studies, the case studies of Chile, of Australia, and of the city of Medellin in Colombia. And we have three speakers. They're going to speak each for half an hour. They will speak in some detail, and then we'll break for lunch. After lunch, we'll have 1 hour to have a discussion in a panel form. So the three of them will sit together in a panel and take your questions and observations for 1 hour after lunch. So speakers, you've got half an hour each, and we'll start with Chile and Hugo.
Good morning again. I want to present the Sistema de Empresas called CEP. What is the entity that centralized the monitoring of 20 of 28 SOEs in Chile. Yeah, there are 8 SOEs that actually are out of the scope of CEP scope, and mainly are the biggest company in SOE or among SOEs, Chilean SOEs. Therefore, and among them actually is Codelco. The Chilean SOEs develop and participate in business activity in strategic sectors, and mainly the main reason that is exposed, reason why we need in Chile SOEs are because they are in strategic sectors. Yeah? But in reality, we realize that is said, for instance, in the case of harbors, or in some kinds of transport, or in the case of services, they actually you will probably said will be necessary to have a state-owned enterprise, and probably you will say probably no. We have in strategic sectors such as transport harbors. In the case of Chile, it's supposed the geographic conditions of the country makes hard to have good harbors for the transportation roles, and that's the reason because they are deemed as essential facilities. And that's the reason because they are kept in the ownership of the state, but actually they are exploited by private companies, but the ownership of the harbor or the seaport is in the hands of the SOE, that actually is the counterpart of contracts with the private companies. Also, we have companies in mining, banking, media. Actually, there are one television channel that is from the state, agriculture, utilities, services, retail, even oil field exploitation and refining. That actually Chile is another country that produces oil, but actually the most important issue or the most important business purpose of that company is refining, money printer, and defense. We have 3 companies in defense area. Some of those companies also, again, we are talking about the legal structure of the SOE, can take the form of corporations, and they also, and according to that, are subject to the corporations law. Partnerships that actually is a different body of law regulating this kind of companies, and also have a special form that actually is just created by law. And the law indicates what will be the structure, the board of directors, and the duties and responsibilities of the different members of the company. Chile uses actually a formal definition of SOE, and is mainly related to the property of the ownership rights of the company. There are 19 SOEs that are determined by a specific corp of acts that involve the corporate governance of those companies. Yeah? All the companies are subject to the same rules as private companies. Yeah? Therefore, the securities regulator is called SBS, regulates those companies as such as any other listed company. But obviously, since many of those SOEs are not listed companies, the focus of the SBS regarding their surveillance of those companies are not the same as listed companies, because the SBS think that the more risks are involved precisely in listed company instead of those that are actually not listed ones. Also, they are controlled by the Office of Controller, that is a governmental entity that controls all the public sector and specifically all the public accounts, the accountability of the different services and, in this case, SOEs. 20 of 28 SOEs are subject to CEP's evaluation of their performance strategies and goals. Yeah. When we are talking about these performance strategies and goals, we are talking about the main essence of the CEP. CEP was created by in order to appoint the board of directors of the SOEs. The idea is try to produce or make some distance between the political decision or the political interference of the government from the SOEs. As I mentioned in the past session, it's a process. It's not a reality that you can make in just one act. It's a process, yeah, and therefore, specifically, CEP was created in 2001, and still we are trying to incorporate more companies to the surveillance of the CEP. Also, there is a problem with CEP regarding to the legal structure. Currently, CEP is a committee of Corfo, what actually is a public service that actually was created by law, by an act, but CEP has not supported by an act. Actually, it's just created by a decision of Corfo, was the committee involved in that creation. So, furthermore, CEP represents the rights of the rights of the state in different companies. There are listed companies, there are private companies, that represent the minority shareholder of those companies. This is just try to spectrum of the different companies involving transportation. There are 10 harbors. This is a railroad company. This is a subway company, and this is a mail company. Banking, we have Banco del Estado, this is a state-owned company. Mining, we have three companies. Defense, this is specifically in the case of water. We have companies that actually has the rights to exploit the water system in Chile, but actually the exploitation, the operation of those services are made by private companies, and the ownership of the water rights are in the hands of the SOEs. The corporate governance of Chile is mainly, the main focus is in the board of directors. Therefore, it's necessary to provide authority to those boards. Again, this has been a process. This has been a process that has taken at least 14 years. But currently, you know, we understood that the companies are managed by the board of directors. Consequently, even the political interference that currently is usual to receive some interference from the ministry or some specific ministry is made on the board instead of directly to the manager to management of the company. Talking about the managers. CEP issue code and guidelines. The idea of this is advice on good practices for boards. Since in some occasions there are some directors that are appointed not in a basis of capacity, in a basis of abilities, but in a basis of closest to the government at the moment. The way to deal with those directors was providing tools, provided a toolkit in order to indicate what is expected or what is the different conducts that could be made by the directors. And CEP is the representative of the state directly and indirectly. What does it mean? Mainly, the appointment of directors is made by CEP, even when political interference, and also who appoints the external auditor companies is CEP. And that's why is that important? Because the external auditor will make you another opinion about the financial situation of the company. Again, that was a process, was not made in 1 year. The guideline principles and general framework for the companies is these ones. We want good board of directors, teams, no rock stars, which means, what does it mean actually? We don't want a spectacular one, we have a spectacular one director. But actually, what does it care? We need teams. Again, The boards, you suppose, are that. The decisions of the board of directors is the decision, a collective decision. It's not just the decision of one person. That's the reason of that. Composition of the board. We're talking about here of balance and coordination. How you manage to organize the decision of the board, and the boards actually make and create a team is a situation that requires coordination between them. Knowledge of the business, and this is some requirement that actually is not, for instance, enforceable for private companies, but actually SEP what cares is what is the time devoted to the enterprise. In the appointment, we try to indicate, I was the chief legal counsel of SEP, we try to indicate it to someone interested in to appoint a specific director, said this candidate has 5 directors, other participate in another 5 boards, not necessarily from private companies, but for instance, in the case of non-profit organizations. And our warning was, if this person participates in so many boards, it has so many responsibilities, how much time can devote to manage the company? Accountability of board of directors. The real way in which the SEP try to enforce the responsibility of boards is in the appointment. In Chile, directors can be revoked at any time. A director can last in a board of directors just 1 day. That's the rule for private companies, and that's the rule for SOEs. Therefore, we are talking about the same rules for every company. The idea is try to show that you have to fulfill your duties. You have to comply with your responsibilities. Other issue that is very important for in the action of SOEs is clear focus and goals. Excuse me, but clear, and why I just jump, I return to this one, but clear focus and goals, because this depends of the SEP. The goals are defined, and obviously we talk with the companies. The idea is convinced that these goals are convenient for company, especially because they are involved with the business purpose of the company. In Chile, the constitution forbids that a company can make other businesses except for those that actually was created, even it was created as a corporation, which means a common legal form for companies. Therefore, for instance, a transport company cannot make, I don't know, gross flowers, even if they think that is a good business, a good business. Therefore, our main concern is to create focus, that the companies are involved just in one specific matter. Again, the next one is accountability of board of directors, and that's the reason, because I mentioned before, after the previous one, because how can you make an accountable board of directors if they are not know what their goals and they are not have a clear focus? Yeah. It's supposed a board of directors should worry about this, but actually the goals is provided by the entity. In the case of a private company, will be provided by the shareholders meeting. Mm. In the case of a 100% owned company, the shareholders meeting actually will be the same state. In the case of Chile, that will be represented by SEP. And therefore, the accountability of board of directors is actually is enforced in the way to change the board of directors if it is not, it not to perform the duties or the goals that actually was proposed by SEP. Strategy depends on board. Efficiency and competitiveness depends on board. Administrative and financial integrity depends on board. Transparency depends on board. Therefore, SEP is a small unit, actually has 24, 25 persons, no more than that. And the idea is to try to focus in getting information, know what is the performance of the companies in order to appoint good board of directors. And again, good teams, no individualities. There are an importance of corporate social responsibility, transparency, importance of labor relationships. In some cases, we have a member of the labor union in And as in some companies, specifically, guys, that's the case of transport companies in which there are representatives of the workers in the same board of directors. And actually, the option of that was because the legislators, the Congress, thought that it was convenient to get more information or to get better knowledge about the labor demands. And finally, environmental commitment, because in Chile we have some SOEs that are involved in the mining exploitation. Legal status of SOEs, as mentioned, we have different forms, and actually that's a problem. It's not convenient. Currently, the convenient would be to have just one form of legal, as legal structure for all SOEs in order to have a better knowledge of them. But the purpose is creating value for the state. The owner state present is in the form of the SEP, enforce accountability of board of directors, and the main issue is enforcement by the Chilean Stock Exchange Commission. Yeah? As I mentioned, Chilean SOEs are subject as the same manner than a listed company to the SBS obligations and rules. SEP is comprised or is managed by a council. That council is comprised of 9 councillors appointed as follows: 3 appointed by the President of the Republic, one of which will be, and actually is, the chairman, 2 appointed by the Ministry of Finance, 1 appointed by the Ministry of Economy, and 3 appointed by the Executive Vice President of Corfo. In the appointment of these persons, that actually, the idea of this is change it. Actually, there are currently a draft in the Congress that change this structure and at least appoint 2 councillors that will be independent from the government. And those 2 councillors will be appointed with the agreement between a proposal of the president with the agreement of the Senate Camera in Chile. The idea of that is try to replicate the appointment of the members of the central bank in Chile that currently has been a system of appointment that actually works. Currently, I said for the last year, the inflation is a control issue or macroeconomic issue in Chile. The main functions and power are acting as technical advisor of the state in relation to the management control of SOEs. The original purpose of SEP was appointing directors, and just that. But how can you appoint directors if you don't know how the company or the SOEs have been performing? And the good thing of SEP is have tried to unify the different ways to provide information to the central entity. This is in spite of the fact that actually there are different ministers that actually try to intervene in the same company, but actually just the presence that actually this is a matter that have been gaining with time. Again, more than 10 years. Currently, ministries knows that if they want to talk with a company, they have to do it not through SEP, but talking with SEP, and SEP, that will be the entity representing the ownership rights of the state, who will talk with the company. In that sense, again, it's a process, a long process, but actually we are maintaining that the political, or actually the intervention of ministries as regulator are being avoided directly in the companies. Represented, the Corfo is the entity has legally the shareholders' rights in those companies are structured as corporations. Therefore, Corfo delegate that representation in SEP. The main function is appoint directors, presidents and vice presidents, and certain SOEs created also by law. Prepare and submit an annual report to the president and to the Congress. And programming covenants with SOEs obtaining grants from the state. Currently, this was a process. In different acts, the Congress was providing more and more functions to SEP. Even if there is no act that actually creates SEP, the law has recognized SEP as the entity which has the representation of the state regarding the SOEs. Again, that was a process. That was not something that just one act provide all the functions to SEP. For instance, this one, obtaining grants, even has been used by the state for providing loans to companies that are outside of the scope of CEP. Consequently, what is the idea? Try to isolate the intervention of sectoral authorities, for instance, ministry, in the companies. If they want to talk about policy or they want to mention we need something from the SOE, well, they have to talk with CEP because the CEP is the representative of the owner. Yeah. CEP provide guidelines to the companies and approve the strategic plan has to be proposed annually by companies. Companies, or SOEs, excuse me, are who provides or propose a business plan to CEP, and CEP approve that that draft. Also approve the annual budget has to be proposed by the same company. And the main role of CEP during the year is monitoring the management. You know? Therefore, the enterprise, actually we're talking about boards. Again, the focus is in boards. It's supposed boards are responsible for the managers of the company. Strategic planning that actually has to be approved by CEP, annual budget that has to be approved by CEP, and goals that actually are proposed by CEP. And they are talked with the companies in order to agree with such a point. Control internal and external auditing. Control mechanisms, internal auditors, que son auditores internos, depend functionally from the management of the SOEs. SOEs are who appoints the internal auditors, but the external auditors are appointed by CEP as representative of the owner. The SOEs are subject to the surveillance of the securities regulator, yeah, and also to the control of is accounting control by the Contraloría General de la República. This office, as I mentioned, that controls all the different accounts of the different public services. Kinds of audit activities, because for CEP is very important, this matter, since we expect from the external auditors, especially they are comply with correctly with their function, is external on financial statements. They are published once a year, as the same as will be the case of private companies, together a summary of the main factors of the SOE. This is the same rule for listed company. Therefore, again, they are subject to the same rules of transparency that will be a private company. Audit activities by the Contraloría General de la República, or the Control Office, is published on the website of the Contraloría General de la República. These one also are published in the website of the companies. They are also available in the page in the website of the securities regulator. The idea is try to make as public as much as possible the different financial information, the different material facts of the SOEs. They are tried as listed companies, and despite the fact that many of them are no issue any kind of security. Internal should be known by the board. The internal auditor is just responsibility of the board, is the tool that the board itself has for providing the information for obtaining their needs or for complying with the duty of care of the board. What are the reasons why, in the case of Chile, we indicate that we need SOEs? As counterparts and regulators regarding strategic assets. That's the case of harbor companies, and also has been mentioned regarding the oil refining and exploitation. For instance, that's the case of ENAP, that is an oil company that is a SOE. For managing strategic assets such as Codelco or ENAP, or for ensuring diversity and pluralism in media, because TVN is the channel of the television owned by the state, but actually the way in which the main concern regarding this company was how you ensure diversity and pluralism, how you avoid that this became an instrument of publicity of the government. And the way in which it was that was through a law, and that, through an act, and that act create the composition of the board of directors. Again, the board of directors was the tool used for the management of the company. Furthermore, and another reasons are facilitating access to financial markets to certain segments of the community. It's supposed Banco del Estado should provide financing to the lower, the sector of the population that has less resources. The only problem with that is actually they provide financing to any kind of company, and actually they compete with private banks, and many times they provide even more expensive interest rates in loans that are made by private companies or private banks. Also for protecting small producers from problems in the formation of prices. That's the case of Cotriza. That actually is a company that creates purchase power for wheat. Wheat is also, it was supposed, very important for agricultural producers to have a power or purchase power in order to increase the prices that have been paid in the internal market in Chile. National security, that is the case of the defense companies. There are three. For issuing public documents. That's the case of Casa de Moneda. Casa de Moneda printed the bills and the money in Chile. But the curious thing here is that in the case of Central Bank of Chile, they buy the money from Australia, from Sweden, from abroad companies. And what will be, when the purpose of Casa de Moneda, which is the SOE, is try to gain that market, what is the internal market. Therefore, Casa de Moneda even has not, but they print the money for Argentina, in the case I understood from Paraguay and other countries, but in the case of Chile, that not the case. Only for coins, in coins just made for Casa de Moneda. Relationship with private sector, the legal and regulatory framework for SOEs ensure a level playing field in market where SOEs and private sector companies compete. Specifically, is mentioned by the Constitution and also by law that SOEs cannot receive a special treatment regarding to private sector companies. And in many times, Supreme Court in Chile has confirmed that rule. For instance, in one case, the mailing company tried to make a new form to send messages and send packages, and private companies in the mailing business goes to the court and said this company is breaching the law that forbids that the SOE can only make more than that is included in the business purposes. And actually, Supreme Court said this SOE break the law, and that was it. Why is that? What's the reason of that? Mainly, if a company has the temptation to increase, especially in the case of SOEs that many times are really governed by management, many times one will prefer a company just grows and grows. And in that way, to use public resources just for the same benefit of the management. Yeah? Because for management, it's good to have a bigger company than a smaller company. But actually, if we are follow the level playing field, suppose the SOEs has to perform their duty or their business purpose. I don't know. The above explain why most SOEs have been structured as corporations or other companies, in which is very clear the business purpose of those companies. The same rules are for any kind of SOE created by law or not. And furthermore, SOEs have a stronger regulatory burden since they are subject to the Transparency Act. This act actually requires SOEs to provide more information that actually has to be provided by private companies, and listed one that are the companies that more information provide to the market. And actually the SOEs in Chile are subject to what is called the passive and active duties or responsibility. They have to provide some information that actually is indicated in the law. For instance, financial statement, who are the members of the board, the remunerations, and the fees paid many times, sometimes potential conflict of interest, but also they could have to be provide additional information. The only information that they are not obliged to provide is obviously secrets of the business, because we understand that also the SOEs are subject to the same rules as private company. Private companies has not to provide secrets of the business. SOEs face competitive conditions regarding access to finance and regulation. They request finance usually from private banks. They usually are not provided finance from the Bank of Estado or by the state bank. And the reason is because many times the state bank impose interest rates more expensive than actually provided by the private banking. The state is restricted to certain amounts for granted indemnities to SOEs. Yeah, what does it mean? You cannot get the grant or the guarantee from the state to get a loan, except in the cases in which it has been approved by the budget office.
Excuse me, you have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Must comply, SOEs, as I mentioned, must comply with the same regulatory requirements as private listed corporation. SOEs in which the state participates as shareholder, it has the same rights as a private shareholder. In the case of Chile, there are many companies in which, for different reasons, the state has shares. In such a case, the state has no privilege in front of the other shareholders. And why is that? Because again, leveling playing field is a rule that's been trying to be followed by the country. Yeah. And SOEs are subject to larger transparency requirements. In the case of SOEs in Chile, the most important challenge for corporate governance has been finding the balance between state fulfillment of its ownership role and following certain public interest targets. Many times, the SEP received pressure from the different congressmen or government to making different things that actually was the purpose of the company. But until this moment, we have the protection of Congress and but the Constitution and law. And actually, it's important to have regulation. The idea is to be a high regulation that establish certain limitations to the action of the SOEs. Otherwise, probably the state will have the temptation to make more than actually should do. One of the SEP the goals that SEP has imposed is maximize the net income values of the SOEs. The purpose of all SOEs is try to produce profits. And in the case of those companies, because their business purpose is not possible to get profits, the idea is to produce less losses as possible. And that's the responsibility. Try to become just to get a zero as a result of the financial year. In the case, for instance, of the subway company, the infrastructure we're talking about the tunnels or different other infrastructure is very expensive, and therefore, in such a case, what make the state is. You tell me, please. You tell me one at the moment. You tell me end. And in such a cases, the state finances the infrastructure, but the operational expenditure has to be financed by the same company. And that's the way in which this company has been extended the different lines of the subway. And only that company has operation in Santiago. The idea, if there are public objectives that have been required by some ministry, the idea of that situation is to disclose that requirement. And how to be disclosed? Not only by an email, but by a specific suggestion from the ministry. We try to put it in written in order to try to make responsibilities very clear. And also, the idea of this is separate accounts in order to get a clear funding or clear expenditures for the business purpose general of the company and those specific asked by the ministry. The key for us, the key for SEP is board is responsibly for their decisions, responding with its own assets, and we're talking about family wealth, for bad decisions or for decisions that have not been made complying with the duty of care. That's the main purpose of the rationale behind the duties of SEP: expertise representing the right of the state, adding vision beyond the particular one of each company. SEP has a vision more general that each company, therefore, that permits a centralization of monetary performance of SOEs, coordinate sectoral authorities affecting SOEs. The idea is to avoid that the administrator interfere with the company. And this was the last one. Unification of management styles, reporting duties, goals. We are trying to make a common culture or ideas how to report financing to the companies. Created a scale economies. In the case of 10 harbor companies, they can make some software common for the accountability. Appointment and removal of members of the boards in our SOE is made by SEP on basis of labor experience and professionalism. And good idea is try to create a pool of candidates. And SEP follows the recommendation listed in SOE guidelines and corporate governance.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning. It was interesting listening to Hugo's presentation because for probably 80% of his slides, if you just took Chile off and put Australia in there, it would have perfectly described our situation. And it's interesting over the last sort of 20 years that this consensus has emerged around what good SOE reform looks like, and the fact that you can have, countries like Chile and Australia who are quite different in terms of their legal structure and and their political structure, that they can adopt very similar models and for it to work in both contexts, I think is indicative that there is kind of a reasonably agreed framework that can be adopted to most country situations. I guess the countries that I would say we have to thank for this are Sweden and New Zealand, who are the real pioneers in this area, both of whom are very small countries. So it works in a smallish context and a big context. I think because the situation is not entirely different from what Hugo's gone through, what I'd like to focus on more is the process of reform that we went through in Australia and where and how I think that was successful, and then also just pick out a few of the substantive elements that I think are relevant in the Caribbean context. So I guess the first thing in reform, in SOE reform, was for us to admit that we had a problem. And I mean, the context of the reform that we embarked on, and it's quite some time now, 20 years ago now, was Australia emerged from a very bad recession. And a lot of our SOEs were failing and did fail, and quite a number of state banks failed and had to be bailed out, with additional taxes being put on the populace. So there was really quite a strong public demand for some sort of reform. There was a long process of diagnosis. A committee was established called the Hilmer Committee, which really took about 18 months to examine the problem and come up with some potential solutions. And I think that report really gave us a framework for implementing reform. I think the second thing really was that we had to define what the problem is. And I mean, one of the issues that came up yesterday is this perennial issue of what is an SOE. And I know in a lot of Caribbean countries, it's a very wide definition. It includes basically all parastatals that operate outside of the government sector. In Australia, we took a much narrower interpretation of the term. Basically, we said SOEs were only those enterprises that were essentially commercial in nature. And we took a very simple rule of thumb. We said basically if you don't earn 80% of your revenues from external charges, then you're not an SOE. You're not going to be an SOE. And what did we do with those other entities or units that were not earning 80% of their revenues? They basically went back to general government. So they would form an administrative unit under a ministry, and they were, in the jurisdiction I was in, they were called government business divisions. So there were things like we had a printery, that was operating on quasi-commercial terms, but it was charging basically other government departments. And we said, well, that's not a business that's operating like an enterprise. It's a shared services organisation effectively for government. There were others like museums that, their user charges covered 30% of their costs, but the rest came from a subvention from government. We said, well, you're not operating like a business. So you go back to general government. There was some on the margin, and by putting this 80% rule, basically we created an incentive for them to try and increase their user charging, because it was much more palatable to them to remain as a separate body than to fall back into general government. But by doing this, we really narrowed the scope of the problem, and it allowed us to create a framework that really looked at commercial companies. And so that meant that when we designed our ownership framework, we could really focus it on looking at commercial enterprises. So all of the performance assessment that we did was very aligned to private sector performance assessment. All of the ratios that we looked at, all of the objectives we set were commercial objectives. And I guess having defined the problem and accepted a problem and defined the problem, the third thing we did was develop consensus around what the solution was. And we did that through a national agreement. So covering all levels of government. And it was a very broad-based agreement. It didn't just cover SOEs. It looked at other sectors of the economy as well. And this was a 15-year agreement with a series of reforms that different parties in government had to undertake, milestones and actual payments from one level of government to another level of government. We have a federal system of government in Australia, so we had subnational governments and the national government. So there were payments between the levels of government. And I guess the fourth thing we needed in terms of process was to have some lever for reform. What was going to drive the process of reform at the institutional level, at the enterprise level, at government level. And the basis for our framework was competition. We decided that if we were going to go through all of this, competition in the market was going to be the thing that drove companies, state-owned companies, to change. So everything that we did was motivated around creating competitive environments. So what does that mean in practice? Well, the very first thing was that we had to make sure SOEs were operating on a level playing field with all of the other enterprises in the market. And if you think about SOEs, there's some pluses and there's some minuses. They get benefits from government, but they also have some costs imposed on them, be it high labour rates or inflexible labour markets. So we had to clean all of that up. The way we did that was we got the SOEs to tell us basically any of the disadvantages that they faced. And they gave us a list, and half of them we said that's rubbish, and the other half we tried to fix. So until then, basically SOEs operated in the public sector labour framework, and they operated in the public sector procurement framework. So those were two things that we changed. On the other side of the fence, they weren't paying taxes. Their cost of debt was the government cost of debt, not what the cost of debt would be if they went to the marketplace. And they didn't make any profits. So basically we imposed on them a cost base that would be the cost base that they'd have in the private sector. So all taxes and charges had to be paid. Their debt had to be at the cost that they would face in the private sector. So if they did borrow from government, we added a margin on to reflect the fact that they're more risky than government. They were required to earn a normal level of profit for the business type that they were. So that was on the cost side. On the structure side, they were made to operate under a commercial, a corporate structure. So they were put in the same legal framework as private sector companies. There was one shareholder, and that was the minister, but to other extents, they were exactly the same as a private company. And that imposes all sorts of disciplines on a company, from the accounting and disclosure requirements that are required under a Corporations Act, to most particularly the fiduciary duties that a director owes to a company. And if there are minority shareholders, the protections afforded to minority shareholders under a Corporations Act. So that was a very, very important reform. The third reform was in regulation. So if you think about a lot of SOEs, they're monopolies in their field. And so if we were looking at a pro-competitive market, we wanted to adopt regulatory frameworks that were suited to monopoly enterprises. So if they couldn't be reformed, if the monopoly couldn't be removed, then that meant price regulation. And the fourth thing was legislation. We went and looked at every single piece of legislation in Australia for any anti-competitive element and documented each one of them, and they were only retained if we could make a cost-benefit argument for doing so. So for each SOE, and I'll take marketing boards, they lasted for 5 minutes. They were the first things to go because they all had monopolies on buying potatoes or sugar or whatever it was and exporting them. We couldn't make the case for keeping them. So I think there's one marketing board that exists in Australia now from 40 or 50 that existed 15 years ago. And a lot of those were obviously state-owned. So that I guess was part of the pro-competitive reform. For those SOEs that remained, because they're now in a marketplace and they had a cost structure similar to the private sector and they had operating structure similar to the private sector, there was no excuse for them not to succeed and there was no protection for them if they failed. So I think that set the conditions for reform, but I don't think that is the essence of the reform that we did. And if you look at the essence of the reform that we did, that comes back to Ruben's slide of yesterday, where he had the 4 boxes. He had the private sector owners who are interested in profit and the private sector board and management who are interested in profit and the public sector owners who have diffuse and diverse objectives and the board, SOE board that has diffuse and diverse objectives. And it's really that last box that is the real problem with SOEs. How do you get a board to reconcile wanting to be a commercial company when it's got all of these non-commercial objectives? And I guess the solution we came up with, and it's not us who came up with it, but I think New Zealand and other countries, was to say that the board can never do that. They are not equipped to do that. So it has to be done somewhere else. And the place to do it is up at government. So if we can, as far as possible, make that company down the bottom like a normal company, then it's got the best chances of surviving and succeeding. And so if we have got these objectives which are non-commercial, we have to work them out at a government level and give a solution down to the company so that it can operate on a commercial basis. So how did we do that? Well, the first thing we did was got the companies to tell us what all of these non-commercial objectives were that they thought they had. And you imagine the list was quite long. This had never been done, so companies were operating on a set of assumptions about what their business was meant to be, what ministers expected from them, what cabinet expected from them. When they produced their list, in fact, it was quite different from the list that government expected them to produce. There was lots of things in there that they thought they were expected to do that they weren't actually expected to do. So they were operating under 20 years of assumptions about what it is they were meant to be doing. And so when you actually went through the process of saying, well, do we really need that? The answer in a lot of cases was no. When the answer was yes, we said, well, we're going to treat this like a purchaser-provider arrangement. We're going to buy that service off you. So you as a company are effectively a service delivery agent for government. And that applied to everything. If you were providing low-cost electricity, we bought that off you. We bought it off you at market rates, and you provided it at the low rates. If you provided a bus service that was suboptimal, we bought the bus service off you, and you provided it at market rates. Suddenly, they operated as a commercial business. The fly in the ointment with all of that is the government has to come up with the money. And the government didn't want to come up with the money. So our initial solution to that was to not give them the money. We gave them the money on paper so that they could effectively be assessed as if they had the money. And then we had to prosecute the argument with government that you are paying for this anyway. You're paying for it either through cross-subsidies to other users, which means higher tariffs, or you're paying for it through capital injections later on. So you're paying for it. We need to recognise it now, and at some point you're going to have to start paying for it. The ace in our sleeve, I guess, was the fact that we'd introduced these competition reforms so that the companies themselves could no longer cross-subsidise, because if there was some service that they were overcharging for, they were being cherry-picked. So some other company was coming in and providing it at a lower price because the market price was obviously lower than what they were doing the overcharging for. And so this process really drove ministers to make some very unpalatable decisions for themselves, but that process took a good 10 years to work its way through the system. Yeah. But, yep.
Sorry, but how many companies during that 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, they would change on average every 5 years in Australia. So, I mean, it was an educative process. I guess the way we sold it to governments at the start was nothing needs to change. You don't need to change any of the services you provide. We're just making it a more transparent way for you to provide those services. But we recognised, I guess, in the Ministry of Finance before it twigged with other people that there would be financial consequences down the line. But really that is an intergenerational issue. That's about who pays for it. It's not that it's being paid for or not. It's just that you need to pay for it now because you're the one who's providing the service now. So the beauty of this sort of framework is that it allows all sorts of things to happen. Suddenly, all of those services which are provided on a contractual basis become part of the budget. So rather than the minister just ringing up and saying we need a bus service to wherever, he has to put a proposal in through the budget because he's got to buy that service. It allowed for competitive contracting. If we didn't want the SOE to provide the service, we'd go to competitive tender. All of that, I'd stress, took some time. We didn't immediately open the market up to competition and then start tendering for services. We wanted to give SOEs time to adjust. And so that's why I say, it's a 10-year framework for them to adjust their business structures, to adjust their operating frameworks. For government also to decide whether it needed to own a lot of these things, because when you get to a position where you're defining non-commercial services, if you have some SOEs that aren't providing any non-commercial services, what's the reason for government to own them? So the other upshot of this was that there was quite a substantial amount of privatisation. Also, having a regulatory framework that regulated monopoly prices meant that we could sell some of the monopolies. So I guess that's the process by which we kind of tried to address the bottom square. So we tried to move all of that up to government, reconcile all of those competing objectives at the government level and leave the businesses to be businesses. We were able to do that because we defined SOEs as commercial enterprises. So it was a very simple process. You don't have things like hospitals down there because to us they went back to general government. So it was a very, I guess, contained framework. So then if you look at I won't go through all this, but it's basically what I said. So this is the funding of the non-commercial activity. If you look at the outcomes, how does this thing work? Where am I meant to point it? I want to point it there, but that's the screen. There's no... Can you move on a slide? Anyway, I'll move on. The net outcome is that I'm going to move on. The net outcome is that there was is that the blue screen of death? The net outcome was that there was a massive productivity boost in Australia between 1995 and 2005. We had a recession in 1991, we haven't had one since. And a large proportion of the 25 years of uninterrupted economic growth comes down to the microeconomic reform that was embodied in these reforms. There's a slide in the pack you may look at which looks at OECD countries between 1990 and 2000 and their productivity gains, total factor productivity gains. And I think there's 7 countries that had net total factor productivity gains over that period. 5 of them engaged in meaningful SOE reform in that time. It is a substantial driver of productivity growth in an economy. The net gain to households in Australia was in the order of $7,000. That's through things like lower electricity prices. And if you think about SOEs, they're often engaged in all those upstream activities like ports and electricity and transport. And so if you get efficiency gains in their operations, that flows right the way through the economy. Every single business uses electricity, or in the Caribbean context, they all import their goods through the port. If you can reduce port prices by 30% through improvements in SOE performance, then the impact that has on an economy is just huge. And that was our experience. I think that's been the experience of those countries that have engaged in this sort of reform. In terms of what our structure looks like now, we still have all of the problems that everyone talked about yesterday. We still have political interference. We still have loss-making SOEs. We still have unfunded subsidies. SOEs aren't a problem that you solve, they're a problem that you manage. I think the extent of our problems are probably a lot lower now than yours, but certainly when they started, they were absolutely no different. So I think I'll leave it at that and hand over to Ruben.
Thank you very much, Jim. Over to Ruben.
Okay, we are going to see this case that is, you will see quite different from the previous one. And it's a situation that is probably quite different from the one you are facing in your countries, because what I'm going to be telling you is about the story that is 60 years old this year. It started in 1955, and it's an SOE, but it's a different level. In South America, we have municipalities that has very, very strong power. So this is the case of one municipality that has one very, very good and very successful company, an SOE. So this is not, this company doesn't belong to the central government, but to the municipal government, to the central government at the municipality level. That's a huge difference probably as compared to other countries. Second thing, we're going to be dealing with the city of Medellin. Medellin is a city in Colombia that it has a population of about 3.5 million population. This city has a very interesting story in relation to the economy of our country. Most of the industry, the heavy industry that exists in Colombia and the commerce and so on, was born in Medellin. So Medellin has a tradition of entrepreneurship and also a tradition of good management in terms of businesses and so on. So that's why I have this title. The corporate governance in Medellin is success can be replicated, because this is basically the lessons that I would like to transmit here. I will talk about the city of Medellin and the EPM group. Group is exactly the same thing as holding. We call within our legislation, we call that group holding of enterprises. I will address basically the issues of corporate governance in EPM. What is the model that we had? I had the privilege of working for EPM 2 years ago for 5 years. I developed the new model of corporate governance for the company, well, with my team, of course. And this is the model that exists today. And some lessons that I will be drawing through the case, and probably after lunch we will have the time for this to discuss. This is Medellin. Medellin is located, this is Colombia. We are in the northern part of South America, and here is Medellin. This is a very hilly situation in Colombia. It's like here in Jamaica. And that's a very important issue, and I will tell you that later why. Here is Medellin. As I mentioned, EPM started 60 years ago as a municipal company in charge of water, energy, and telecoms in the city of Medellin. Today, EPM is still a municipal utility. It's a company owned by the municipality of Medellin, and it's a holding of 48 companies in Colombia, Latin America, Mexico, El Salvador, Panama, Chile. The revenues of the group is $53 billion, and the assets is around 16 billion. And the profit of, this is a wrong number, this is 2014, is 1.5 billion. That's the profit of the company. And it's a state-owned company, not at the national level, but a municipal level. They have 48 companies working in Colombia. And so basically, this is a multinational, a municipal multinational. And it's totally and fully state-owned. EPM is still public. I like to emphasize that because there are no shares. The property is 100% of the municipality, and that's it. And today, and this is the 2014 figure, transfer annually to its owner, and the owner is the municipality of Medellin. So that's the one who has the right to get the profit. With a rule they have that is between 30 to 50% of the profit must go to the owner, to the municipality. Last year it was 600, half the utility, more or less half the utility. The profit is 600 million. So, first thing, this is a very good example of capitalism from the state. The municipality of Medellin is making money by providing services. And probably this is something that is not here, but the coverage of water and sanitation and energy in Medellin is obviously 100%. They are not going to do investments outside the country, outside the city, excuse me, if you don't have covered your basic purpose, that is providing services to the community they are working in, that is the city of Medellin. So, as I mentioned, this is something that started in 1955 and now it's a group. But I would like to mention one very important issue in our country, and it is regarding the act, the Public Utilities Act of 1994. In that time, there was this big discussion in the world, or at least in Latin America, if you would privatize or not privatize. By the time I was working at the central government in Colombia, so I had the opportunity to work in the group who prepared this draft law. The discussion for Colombia was not if the state is good or the private sector is better and so on and so forth. We didn't go in that discussion. We simply changed everything and said, okay, if you are good, you have the right to provide the services. I don't care if you are a state, I don't care if you are the private sector. You got to provide the service, you have to deliver. And that's the whole basis from our constitution to enter into the public utilities in Colombia. So if you are a good state-owned company like this one, you can provide the service. But if you are private, you can do it too. There is no distinction for us. The important thing is that this law allowed that as a rule for the country. And second, and that's part of what Hugo presented at the beginning this morning, we created a whole regulatory framework to do that. We have today regulators for energy, regulator for water and sanitation, and regulation for telecoms. So then, once we had that, we opened the market. So this company, because of that law, changed and become what in Colombia we call a industrial, a commercial company within the state. So essentially, within the state of Colombia, you can have this kind of enterprises from the state level. So this is something that you can do. You can be the owner, be in the state, but you can work on the private sector side. So we can provide services and on a commercial basis. So that's the whole thing. This company was became became an industrial and commercial entity of the state in Medellin. Why did they do that? Basically because they saw the market as a big opportunity to grow. So essentially in 1997, started a whole strategy for 20 years just to do that. So in 2003, this company got like 4 or 5 subsidiaries within Colombia. And today, as I mentioned, they have 48 companies in Latin America. That's the whole story in 55 years. But what are the corporate governance issues at EPM? It doesn't mean that we don't have problems. This is, as I mentioned yesterday and today, and as Jim Jahabs told us in Australia, we still have politicians in the city, and they are still working on the issues they're interested in. But in the case of EPM, the situation is a little bit more complicated than that. First of all, here, as I mentioned, the municipality of Medellin owns EPM. But EPM has this kind of different subsidiaries. For instance, within Colombia, this is CHEC. CHEC is a company, energy company that is operating in the center of the country. So the owner of the majority of the shares is EPM, but the minority is the governor of that region of Colombia. So in terms of corporate governance, I have a politician that is a governor, some minor, in other companies, we have some mayors that are municipalities also. And here we have the employees, retirees in that company. So in the base, we have a totally 100% state-owned company. But in the subsidiaries, we have a diverse, very diverse stockholders and partners of EPM. EPM has as a strategy to buy companies or to create companies only with total control, meaning that 51% of the stock. So all these companies in Colombia or outside Colombia are controlled by EPM. But in any case, in every case, the corporate governance problems are totally different. For instance, in Panama, our main partner is the government of Panama. So in the board of directors is coming the Ministry of Energy, in that case of ENSA, that is one of the companies in Panama. In another company here, Del Sur, that is in El Salvador in Central America, this is a totally private company that is in the stock exchange of El Salvador. So EPM has like 87% of the stock, and 13 and 59% of the stock is running in the stock shares market. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a company that has these kind of problems here that I will show in a moment, and all these problems here. But still, this is a very profitable and successful company. What are the main corporate governance issues besides that? The first one that I mention all the time, the potential of political interference risk. Because the mayor of the city is a politician that is elected every 4 years, and also the councilmen are elected every 4 years. And both the council and the municipality have the ownership rights over EPM. So what is the risk? The one that you know very well, risk of cronyism, inefficient investments, and populism. The same problem we have is we check and balances, and as you know, if you are in charge, you have politicians taking care of politicians. So that would be a complication at the end of the day. And in the case of Medellin, in the case of EPM, the other thing that is important to mention that I already mentioned briefly is that the benefits must be transferred 30 to 50% to the municipal government. So it's a lot of money that they are making with that company. So this is a very interesting case. You have politicians that would like to say, okay, let's go and lower the tariff. And they say at the same place, another politician, no, hold on. If you do that, we will not get these $600 million we are receiving yesterday. So what do we do? So the model forced the politician to behave as an entrepreneurs. So now the company have these problems, these issues of corporate governance, but the company is working. Well, but one day, in 2004 to 2005, the risk materialized. A mayor was elected, and he attempted to capture the jewel of the crown, EPM. And he tried to capture the part for his party benefit, and announced a general reduction of tariffs without justification to the population. What do you think it was the answer of the population? Any guesses? People reacted against that. People didn't allow to the mayor to reduce the tariffs. That's the success of EPM. People, I mean, common citizens, they didn't allow the mayor to do that. And they started a very interesting process. He appointed a very incompetent and corrupt manager, and immediately within the company, it was created a labor union. But the labor union was created with the sole purpose of preserving the company. So the labor union, in the afternoons, they went to the major newspapers in the city and denounced everything. So every single step that the mayor gave immediately was front page the following week, the following morning. So every single thing that he tried to do was totally public immediately because of the labor union. And the labor union was created only to preserve the company, not to preserve their interest, the company. So what happened? Finally, the solution that was created in 2005, 2006, was creating a committee, a civic steering committee, that was integrated by civil society. So the society said, we cannot allow this guy to do what he is doing. But the problem they have, or they face, is that this guy was elected. So he was an elected official, so you can throw it out. The only thing was trying to push him with the media, with the television, and so on and so forth. And finally, this guy was defeated in the re-election. He was very populist, he was very popular in some areas of the city, but he couldn't win the election in the coming year. So then EPM realized, oh, we have a corporate governance problem. Because if this guy that is so crazy are right, who guarantees us that the coming year or 10 years after will not come another guy like this? So that's why we started the corporate governance model. That was the trigger to start to do something better for the city. So this is what I told you yesterday, and this was exactly the same slide that I used when I started working on corporate governance within EPM. This is exactly the same thing that we used, so I will not go through this. But this is the same discussion we had during the process in preparing our new corporate governance model. Basically, this is the idea. So what is the corporate governance model of EPM? It's very simple, and it's in this slide. Essentially, we have here the Medellin Council and the Medellin Mayor. They exercise the ownership right in the neighbor, on behalf of the city, on behalf of the citizens. And we have here the board of directors, the chief executive officer, and the board of directors of subsidiaries, subordinated companies, and stockholders. So the whole system is as simple as that. Was created to guarantee common purpose and direction as a holding. And these guys, we tried formally to align all the interests of these guys within this purpose. And we basically design a system of ownership rights, decision, and responsibilities among these different levels. So this guy, for instance, the only possibility he has to intervene here is to approve or disapprove all the major assets sales that the company is proposing. He cannot interfere in the administration of the company. No councilman is allowed to enter EPM. He cannot. And he is the owner of the company. And that's something that is written in the corporate governance code of the company. The Medellin mayor, he has, for instance, the right only to access the company through 3 different channels. One, the board of directors, he chairs the board of directors. 2, there is a specific area of EPM that is designed only to communicate with the mayor's office. There is only one, nobody else can do that. And 3, when we present publicly, because this is something that is public in the city, our annual report, where the mayor is present and he presents all this through the society. This is the only 3 ways he can enter and talk and to make decisions. All decisions he would like to make, he has to go to the board, and that's the formal way by which he can exert his property rights. No other ways. There is no other form to do that. And it's exactly the same thing through the whole process. But all this thing is designed between a very clear control environmental accountability. In general, we have a set of committees, auditors, external, etc. Besides the regulators we have in the city and in the country. This is one of the most complicated systems in the country, because we have at the local level the Contraloría Municipal, where we call the municipal controller, but we also have a national government controller. We have a supervision of superintendencies. We have the regulators, 3, 4 regulators affect the performance of EPM. So that's the whole system, very simple system. So all the rules that we created for this model are in the corporate governance model of EPM, of the corporate governance code of EPM. So every single thing is written. For instance, the board of directors, they know exactly what to do. They know exactly what are the performance. Just as an example, every single meeting of the board of directors is recorded, and they have to evaluate every single session of the board. So once you finish the session of the board, there is a guy that goes through with a paper and say, okay, how do you behave today? Tell us about this and this and this. And before entering to the board, you have to disclose if you have any potential conflict of interest. You have to put it in written before entering to the board. So if you have one, there is no problem. You enter, you declare it, and you leave it and leave. And that's it. That's the problem. You can come and etc. But all those things are in a document by which you know exactly what you have to do, why you have to do, and what is the purpose of your present being in the board. So this is the core corporate governance model. The key thing, and probably one of the things that differentiates EPMF with other companies in the country and outside the country, is the model that is based in these three basic issues. The first thing is a framework contract between the municipality and EPM. The second thing that I have already mentioned is the corporate governance code that basically regulates ownership relationship, board of directors, and information and control. And the third one is the periodic report strategy. Basically, we are based in a system that is called in Colombia comply or explain. You have to report what you do, but if you fail to comply something, there is no problem, but you have to explain why. And you have to spell out very clear every single year why did you comply with something. That there was a landslide, that there was a lot of rain or whatever. The regulation change or the rule change. You can do whatever, but you have to explain exactly what happened, what you didn't comply. But the most important thing that differences EPM with other companies is this framework contract between the municipality and EPM. It's an agreement that it was invented in 2006. This is not legislation in Colombia. It is something that the mayor and the general manager decided to create for the company. That is an agreement between the municipality aimed at preserving EPM sustainability. So basically what does he say? The municipality says, okay, I will relinquish my property rights just for the sole purpose of the efficiency of this company. I will not only try to preserve the autonomy of the company, but I will try to do the best in the interest of the company, not in the interest of my utility of my position as a mayor or the party that I represent as a mayor of Medellin. This corporate governance, this framework contract, basically establishes that the mayor formally respects the PM's autonomy, that he's compromised to an objective criteria to select the members of the board. In Colombia, by law, in these municipal utilities, we have to have a nine persons board of directors. Every one of them is chosen by the mayor. So the mayor, what would he choose? Probably his friends. So here he declares who are coming to the board and why he's coming to the board. But this is not in the Colombia law. This is a complete voluntary agreement between the general manager of EPM and the mayor of the city, and to respect the formal channels of communication that I mentioned. Of course, if I'm providing EPM with autonomy, the EPM has obligations. The obligations are financial compliance, fully financial compliance, guarantee financial transfers, the money that they are producing, guarantee compliance with community demands within a process that is very clear within the company. Transparency. Transparency is the rule of the game of EPM. If you enter to the website, and you can do it today or whenever you want, you will see every single number, every single investment, every single contract. If you want to enter to be an employee of EPM, is something that only can be made by computer. You cannot send your CV. You cannot come and say, okay, this is my CV. I would like to have an interview. The only way to enter for a professional is through an electronic system. There is no way today to do it otherwise. We have an independent external auditor and a program of corporate social responsibility, and that's pretty much the whole thing about the EPM. This is EPM, and as an example of the effectiveness of the company, 2 weeks ago, one of the companies that Hugo mentioned this morning, recently of the Chilean water sector, was acquired by EPM. EPM paid 925 million for Aguas de Antofagasta, that is Antofagasta Waters, that is a huge company that the company has that Chile has in the northern part of the country. If you have a company that can buy outside Colombia, a company that is $900 million, is because it has a huge economic power, and it still is public. And this is the story of a public utilities, an SOE that is providing money for his owner, as probably a lot of companies that we are dealing with right now and that we are considering this seminar can do. Of course, behind this there are a lot of stories, a lot of other things that is impossible to address in 20 or 25 minutes. But I think that after lunch we can answer all the questions you may have about this case of Medellin. Thank you.